Um, Stock effects were used, which was as far as we went with special effects. So as seen here, the flashes and the title sequence were basically the only special effects and visuals used in the movie. Um, Not much attention was paid to special effects, which definitely cannot be said about our final project. Um, the process of editing here was very simple and was done in around an hour or two, which only consisted of putting together shots. Okay, iMovie is a really simple program, which is why we used it for our preliminary task, as we were on a tight time schedule. Everyone in our group had experience with the application, so no one required to get used to.
In contrast, the final project required a bit more input due to the detailed nature of the application, which was Premiere Pro. There was quite a bit of difference between that and iMovie in the options it can offer, but also the knowledge and experience you would have to properly construct a film such as ours on it. Here is a part of the editing process which I had to go through. Now, the start was quite simple. It was just like in the preliminary task, getting all the shots, putting them together, trimming them, cutting them. But once all the shots were put together, cut, trimmed, I had to also speed them up to appeal to the audience because the action elements are dominant in the post-apocalyptic genre. And obviously, we could not afford to create proper high-speed chase scenes, which is why we simply took slow footage of vehicles driving by, and I sped that up later on using Premiere Pro. Color changes were made as well to get rid of the really natural look. This consisted of simply color filters, which me and Pablo picked from to create a more vibrant look to the film. And special effects were also a major concern. Here is a good example of a muzzle flash being added to one of the weapons being fired, which is the grenade launcher in this case. I had to motion track the effect and make it seem as if it is moving along with the weapon. Now, to get to this point, I had to actually do some research on websites which provided me with royalty-free stock effects, and that is how I came across Footage Crate. Now, Footage Crate offered a lot of explosions and action-themed effects such as muzzle flashes. Here's some examples. So we had a really wide array of visuals to choose from for the film. And once I chose those, just like the videos in the DSLR cameras, I simply imported them into the timeline. And this is what it got to. Here is another example of motion tracking, which I used for the explosion. Now, the explosions had overlays, so it wasn't just one effect. Here, there are about 2 or 3 different visuals stacked on top of each other. For example, the dust is a separate effect. The actual explosion is a separate effect. The impact of the grenade, which is being launched, is a separate effect. And although the result wasn't as realistic as it could have been, it was still a great improvement in general from our preliminary task. Although the two projects vary in a lot of elements and aspects, obviously the genre and the editing software. Here is a muzzle flash being placed. So yeah, it's mostly to do with motion tracking, which is where most of the input went into. Another element was color correction, which I already talked about, but lighting using digital effects was an element of editing on Premiere Pro. Here is a good example. Now, this was the original shot for me aiming the weapon down, and there are no color filters here or any post-process effects. Whereas here is the final shot which we used. It has much more vibrant, stands out as a much more vibrant shot, and an artificial digital lens flare is added here. Obviously the credits, which were made by Pablo, were layered on top of the shots, and the whole lens flare, which was a visual we used in multiple shots, such as the sniper scope, which I will get onto now. Now, this was the original shot for the sniper scope. It was simply a really long distance shot from a sand dune by me, of Pablo and the convoy driving by, which then developed into a much more professional scope. Now, how I got there is I had to find a sniper sort of HUD or a reticle from the internet. I imported that and layered that on top of the shot, around which I then simply painted black, as simple as that sounds. And to give it a more lens glass look, as it's supposed to be a telescope sort of layout, I added a filter which darkened the shot, took away the natural color balance, and I added again the lens flare to make it seem as if the glass is reflecting some sunlight. Now, sound was also a major concern, as much as the visual effects in the final task, as none of the effects would have been brought to life without being accompanied by a sound effect, such as an explosion sound for an explosion, obviously. I used the same website as I did for the visual effects to find all the weapon effects, which are all royalty-free, just like the visuals. It also gave a wide array of gun sounds, gunshots, explosions, bullet impacts, bullet reflections, and I used many other websites to find ambience, such as the wind, present in the scenes where the soundtrack is actually, the score is absent. So this is a good example where you could only hear the wind and nothing more, just like the start of the film, which is quite calm. There is no action happening. And the soundtrack itself was taken from YouTube, and we used the MP3 converter. The soundtrack accompanied gave the action theme a much more realistic and classic look, as for a more Hollywood-style film, such as Mad Max. The soundtrack faded in and out depending on what was happening in the shots. So fast-paced cars chase scenes obviously had an increase in sound gain, whereas scenes that had a more visual narrative, such as the death of one of the characters, had a lowered soundtrack, which then rose back in level as the action carried on. Yeah. That's it.
Good stuff.
How even?